Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the Champlain Institute. Yesterday was fantastic. Today we've managed to manage the weather again, which is always beautiful. We've got the diesel of the lobster boats in the background to authenticate the experience here, which is great. If you would remember to silence your cell phones, because there's nothing more embarrassing than that. I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping first. This session is going to last until about 10:45, till 10:45. Then there will be a brief 15-minute break until our 11 o'clock session starts. And there is a very special guest who will be joining us at 11. And so if you were not intending to stay, you may want to do that. Let's just say that this special guest appeared in the film Dead Man Walking, and it might be fun for you to stick around. But we're going to start with a conversation between Catherine Brown Collins. Catherine, welcome to COA.
Thank you.
And Ted Widmer, right? I'm going to be as brief as possible so I can get off the stage, because Ted is going to introduce Catherine. But the title today is Cultural Diplomacy and Soft Power Through the Arts. And one thing we really like to try and do with the Champlain Institute is establish connectivity throughout the week and between the years. And in my eyes, this program this morning really does tie us nicely into our discussions of last year when we were looking at U.S. power on the global stage. Catherine's the director of film, TV, and digital programs at the U.S. State Department. I love that title. I think that is a very interesting, telling, and dynamic title. Ted Widmer is doing his own lecture on Thursday at 11 o'clock entitled 1919, the Year That Shaped the Modern World. And so I'm not going to give him a full intro other than to say we call him T-Dub now. That is his new name, T-Dub. But really, the thing I want to say about Ted is he's been in the Petri dish of the Champlain Institute from the get-go. And he helped us shape the first 2 years in this one, and is a super important part of why this works so well, and has become a great friend of the college. Ted, thank you so much. He is a distinguished visiting scholar and the director of the Humanities Lab at the City University of New York. So without further ado, Ted and Catherine.
Okay. Can you hear us okay? Thank you so much, Darren, for that kind introduction. You may remember me last year as a then specialist in democracy and politics, and I wanted so badly to be re-invited that I'm now an international authority on art. So thank you, Darren and Lynn. It's a great pleasure to welcome Catherine Collins, who comes to us from Washington, as Darren mentioned. She's the director of film, TV, and digital programs at the State Department, and specifically in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, which is also called by its initials, ECA. And I think we have a few retired Foreign Service personnel. Can we just see a show of hands for people, former Ambassador Philip Lader and former Ambassador Jim Lowenstein. And I had the great pleasure, things happen very quickly in Foreign Service, and I'll just tell one story and then turn it over to Catherine. In 1998, I was a speechwriter for President Bill Clinton, and I got separated from the presidential motorcade, and I had an important copy of the speech in my hand that he was going to give, and this was at the time with the Good Friday Accord, and I just got in the first car I could going by, and it was the car being driven by Ambassador Philip later and his family. So we've been friends now for over 20 years. But Catherine does not preside over a world of chaos like speech writing. She's the director of a really important, interesting part of the State Department, finding foreign artists, bringing them to the attention of Americans, and vice versa. So, Catherine, why don't we turn it over to you and
Sure.
tell us what you do.
Sure. Thank you, Ted, and thank you, Darren and the Champlain Institute for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here and tell you a little bit about my work and my colleagues' work at the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Many of you will maybe be familiar with USIA and the work there in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We were sending over artists, Jazz Ambassadors being one of its most well-known programs during the Cold War, and recognition of the power of arts to affect change. Today, many of those activities are housed within the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And it's not just cultural. It is our programs of academic exchange, Fulbright being the most well-known. But also we have a sports diplomacy program. We have a program, Gilman, sending over Americans from underserved communities. And then we have very robust programs bringing foreign artists here and foreign leaders. I'm just going to give a little overview of the Bureau and some of the programs that we're doing specifically in culture to provide context. I think one of the most important aspects of ECA is what comes out of it is the alumni. Extraordinary individuals, many of whom are athletes, many of whom are writers, being recognized by Nobel laureates. We have, I think, currently 1/3 of leaders have come through exchange programs through ECA, and it's quite a dynamic and fun to see the impact of all of that. A well-known alum, Yo-Yo Ma, was part of our programs, I think 10, 15 years ago. I love this quote that he made most recently at the Dartmouth commencement. And I think it captures so much of what we're trying to reflect in our arts programs, in dance, in film, in writing, in hip-hop, in music. I think to be able to capture really the spirit of American artists and also foreign artists coming here. Art is such, as we were talking about yesterday and we will be talking about this week, it's really a form of exploration, of shared human experience. And I think by sending American artists overseas and bringing here, it's a wonderful way to prompt dialogue, empathy, and to create these really lasting connections that are so vital to all of us in the United States and overseas. I'm going to play a video. This is a wonderful program that we have called One Beat. It's a musical residency, started in 2012. It's an open application. Since then, we've had 30,000 musicians from all around the world apply to this. It's a very competitive slot. But I think this captures this program, which brings together 20 musicians from around the world. It's a collaborative program where they spend 2 weeks in a residency, they create art, and then they tour around the United States. Since then, we've had programs overseas, but I'll play this, and then we can talk about other programs. Whoops, sorry.
Just showing the instrument to the kids, that is beautiful, you know. In my country, I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to build some association of musicians that can affect a lot, you know, in society.
I love to record sound, different places around where urban regenerations happened or going to happen, and their thoughts and their anger.
People always talk about technology is so cold, it makes people so separate and so isolated. To me, it's like, as a human being, like how do I use technology and music to make people think in a better way?
موزیک ایهانی زاری کن موزیک زانبه نبینی ایهانی کنه زانبه موزیک حتی که نفسی واندا توازن چرکی.
Too often in our modern world, people are classified as either musicians or non-musicians, really in many cultures. And it's important to remember that we are all, it is our birthright, we're all sound makers.
So this program, it's wonderful in that it tours different parts of the United States. Last year, they had a big program in Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's actually a wonderful aspect of some of these incoming programs, being able to expose a lot of foreign artists to the United States, to different parts of the United States, not just New York and LA, but throughout. And you can see a lot of it is a community engagement, going to different schools, meeting different people, different instruments, the discipline. So we have all sorts of different programs in dance, and I'm just going to go through all of these just so we can begin talking. We do a lot of disability rights programming. This is a dance group that went to Jordan to work with NGOs and schools for kids with disabilities. We do a lot of mural arts programs, again, creating in process and bringing artists together. This is a neat program called American Music Abroad, where we send just up-and-coming musicians and tour 40 countries a year, all different music art forms. This is Kyle Dillingham, who actually just performed at the Grand Ole Opry. He is from Enid, Oklahoma, and well known for his fiddling, and was just recognized, I think. Dolly Parton introduced him. Hip-hop. We do a lot of hip-hop. Our prime audience overseas is youth, and so we need to create programs that are innovative and reflect what young people are interested in. So this, I think, gives you an idea. We have writing programs. We're also supporting the Venice Biennale right now. This is Martin Perrier's installation. And of course, film. So it gives you a very fast and broad exposure to the kinds of programs that we're doing in disability rights and women's empowerment, all for the idea of creating strong civil society and leaders. And I think artists are leaders.
You have a really fun job.
I do.
So what about your journey? And I mean, it was literally a journey through Indonesia at one point. Can you tell us the steps you took for the young people who are here? How do you get a job as interesting as the one you have found?
Right after I graduated,
And you went to a small, obscure college in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Is that right?
I did. And like you, majored in American history and literature. After graduation, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to go overseas. Harvard puts out this guide to grants, and I sort of went through it, and many things like the Rhodes Scholars, I can't get that, I can't. But I found the Henry Luce Scholarship, which was wonderful because it sent young Americans overseas to Asia. And the key qualifiers that you didn't need to know anything about Asia. So I thought, aha, I can do that. But I knew I wanted to be in film, and I knew I wanted to do that. And so I was very fortunate to go overseas with Henry Luce Foundation. And I worked with an Indonesian filmmaker. And it was supposed to be 9 months, and I stayed 5 years. And I worked with her and other artists in Indonesia. Actually, it was the first exposure to how film can be used in different ways and not just in exhibition. We created a foundation to document indigenous communities, and it was being able to travel across the archipelago to document the incredible cultural diversity of Indonesia, but also to bring back the stories of these different communities to Jakarta. And we did all sorts of museum exhibitions in Jakarta, and it was a wonderful experience. And then I knew it was time to come home, and I was most fortunate to get a job with DeWitt Sage, who joins us here in the audience today, and to go from this amazing experience of being in Southeast Asia and the richness and learning about that culture. And that's a great way. I think that's why cultural exchange is so important. You also learn about yourself. You learn about what it is, your own national identity. And then I was fortunate to come back and work with DeWitt at American Masters, and we did 2 documentaries on F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway. And then that began. I was lucky to work in documentary film for many years, and then I have that exposure. I went back overseas with my husband's job, We went to London and Dubai, and then when I came back, I wrestled with, do I go back into film production? Or remembering the impact of going overseas on an exchange, is there something with film and cultural exchange? And luckily enough, there was. So I feel very lucky to have found that there was and to be in this role.
I would imagine that your experience overseas helps you a lot to think about the very complicated ways foreign peoples think about the United States. And do you find yourself going back to Indonesia and conversations you had as you put out our official statements about all manner of things?
Absolutely, because it gives, again, I think what cultural exchange is, any kind of exchange, is exposure, and it's learning to appreciate different perspectives and seeing different perspectives, and how is something going to be received. Many of the films, this is sort of a sampling of the kinds of films that we've been sending overseas. We run a program called American Film Showcase. It's in its 8th year. USC School of Cinematic Arts, our partner for this program. We tour 50 countries a year and put on probably 80 programs a year. And we reach several 100,000 people in person, but also through social media. And I'll just list the countries that we've been to in the last month and a half with this. And these are films that have traveled in the past, and we'll be sending out more. But in the last month and a half, we've been to Estonia, Taiwan, North Macedonia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Bulgaria. We had a program in Los Angeles, Indonesia, Cameroon, Pakistan, El Salvador, Tunisia, and Uganda.
I think North Macedonia just became a country.
It
didn't
did.
Yeah.
It did. So that is it was exciting to have AFS in North Macedonia.
I was proud once to go to South Sudan, which was a brand new country, and I could always top my friends who had never been there. But North Macedonia, you're one up on me. So, what year are you career state now?
I am career now. I'm a civil servant, and I work alongside very closely with our Foreign Service colleagues overseas, and that is actually a key part of partnership of these programs. And we're designing a lot of the programs from Washington. Also, our embassies have very active cultural engagement overseas. But we work to help produce these programs with our partners like USC, like Iowa, like UNC Chapel Hill, like the New England Foundation for the Arts. We create these programs, and then we work with our colleagues overseas to help design and implement and localize. Back to your question about what works and what doesn't. You have to be very sensitive. You want to be able to create dialogue, and you want to be able to create empathy, and you want to be able to create connection, but also you have to be very respectful of local norms. The most challenging, of course, is in some parts of the world, such as different parts of the Middle East, any kind of film exploring sexual identity. And that takes on all sorts of, when you're trying to send independent films overseas to counter stereotypes about the United States, indie films, of course, they're exploring identity and sexual identity.
Right.
And I watch films a little differently now because,
Right.
when I see two characters about to kiss, I'm like, why'd you have to do that? But
That gets us near a delicate subject that I want to respect the delicacy of it, but you've now survived one presidential transition. We had one we had an election in 2016, and presidents can be very different from each other.
yes.
How do you handle the seriousness of your role, no matter who's president? I mean, how do you adapt from one administration to another?
Well, I think I'm relatively new to this, compared with colleagues in the Foreign Service who've been doing this for decades and with great service. I think that our Foreign Service officers don't get enough credit
Right.
for the extraordinary work that they do in the field. I don't think people understand sometimes writ large what the State Department does. to your question, it's interesting. First, it's how does the building move? Because with any kind of new leader, it takes, it's a gigantic bureaucracy. So how that trickles down is the building moves on paper. So that is one aspect of change. But I will say that, of course, and we're all reading all the different changes, and of course there are different policy points. But I will say that, and honestly, that the day-to-day aspect of our job, and my job, and I speak from my personal experience, has really remained the same. Obviously there are different pivot points, but writ large our mission is the same, is to tell the story of the United States, to select films that are going to show all parts of the United States. And I think that's really important. We have an assistant secretary who's a political appointee who is a great supporter of ECA.
That's great.
And I think that really makes a difference. Of course, personally, there are different the parts that I might have a difference of opinion, but writ large, our mission remains the same for ECA. It's to create mutual understanding. It's people-to-people engagement, and so.
Are you finding it harder to work with Hollywood directors because of their own political feelings about current administration, or not at all?
Actually, I think it's interesting. We work, obviously, we do a lot of programs with documentary filmmakers. We have another program called Global Media Makers, which is bringing mid-career writer, director, producers from film and television to Los Angeles, and that's our biggest engagement, one of our biggest engagements with Hollywood. And they're there in Los Angeles for 6 weeks, and they're meeting all sorts of people in Hollywood, from sort of top-level studio to key people at Netflix and Amazon, to people at the different agencies, composers, writers, editors. And this is a program that was started off with creatives from the Middle East and North Africa. We've expanded it this year to India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. And actually, I think that working with Hollywood, I think people get inspired by mentoring and by meeting. And when you connect artists and art to and introduced artists, and they have their own conversation, and they have their film language, and they all are part of the same
That's
conversation. Great. And I think that actually people are leaning more into our programs now, I find, and that's exciting.
In addition to showing fully formed films, TV shows, do you teach the craft of film? I mean, do you help young people in foreign countries? I would imagine it's not always the easiest thing to get a movie camera and start shooting footage, but as someone who worked in Indonesia, you must have special insights into how to translate that technology and make it more accessible to a lot of young people.
Absolutely, and I think one of the key parts of what you've just pointed on is that it's not just the pure exhibition of a film, it's the workshop. So we have, and this is a workshop that we did in Benin, it's working with local storytellers, NGO storytellers, writ large, to learn how to tell their story. We talked yesterday a little bit about whose voice, whose narrative, and I think one aspect of the program is running workshops overseas to inspire young people to tell their own story, but working with the tools on the ground. So a lot of the filmmakers that we're sending overseas are working with young people, and I would say that's half our programs, are those workshops. And here are some, I'm just show examples. This is a fun program we did in Turkmenistan. Oftentimes, these programs in the arts, film, dance, writing are some of the few programs that our ambassadors and our embassies can use overseas when they're hard places. That's when I hear a lot of, like, the soft power in hard places. I hear that used quite a lot. But this was an interesting program that we did in Algeria several years ago. There was a film called Interrupters that was about the cycle of violence in Chicago, and about local leaders going out into the streets and engaging youth gang leaders and trying to talk to them about stopping violence. This is a filmmaker, part of the film, this is the police academy in Algeria, talking about what is the role of police officer in community and how do you have community outreach.
Do you ever find that when you're working with avant-garde communities of artists that the badge of official support from the United States can be as big a problem as a desirable source of funding?
That's for each individual artist to decide, but I know that we are working with some of the leading artists writ large from the United States and overseas. And I think the key part, to answer your question, of that is that we ask that artists go over as private citizens. We ask that they go there to represent their art and their point of view. And they're not government spokespeople. They're there to share and to create dialogue. And so I there might be the artists, and then they can speak to themselves, but given the extraordinary richness of the different kinds of artists that we're working with, some are quite excited. We have many filmmakers who want to keep going out and traveling for us. They say it's one of the most exciting, life-changing experiences just to go on one of these exchange programs. And it energizes them. They see the impact. They're able to reach audiences and individuals in a way. And also, I think it's a reflective experience. Again, going back to what does it mean for their own art? Many filmmakers have actually been inspired by going overseas, and it's impacted their own art. Tom McCarthy, who you may all know from Spotlight, he went over on a program for us. He went to Lebanon and to Oman and was so inspired by that program, then came back and made the film The Visitor. Anyways, I think there's great excitement by artists and the energy that they get. But it does also, I hear many also reflect on what does it mean to be American? What do we take for granted? Obviously challenges that we have and always will have here, but also overseas, when you get to see what is going on overseas, I think it's a moment, and when you're in media environments that are not free, when you can't speak your mind, when women cannot work, when people with disabilities are literally chained at home. I think it's an eye-opening experience, an important one to keep both the ways. And likewise, for foreign artists to be able to come here and to create these connections and see our country in action.
I love the disability focus. I had not heard about that, but is that a new program within state?
No, it's been going on. We do quite a lot also in all of our different programs. In sports, we've wonderful sports programs in disabilities. We have, obviously, it's about access. It's about law as well. We do a lot of work around ADA. There was a wonderful documentary called Lives Worth Living that we sent around the world. I can't remember if it was for the 25th ADA anniversary. But we layered some different programs, I think in Mongolia, where we were screening and creating awareness of the importance of ADA, and simultaneously had a program with people working with legislators in Mongolia to create, to put on their law books access. So that was an exciting outcome.
If you're sending American films around the world, Hollywood must just love you. They must be putting business cards into your hand all the time. Did you go to LA a lot as part of your job?
I do. I'm going on Thursday, in fact. We have a wonderful license called the Motion Picture Licensing Corporation. It's an umbrella license that all of our embassies can use to screen most of the major Hollywood films. Equally, we work with the Motion Picture Association to do ambassadorial for premiere type screenings. And so we screen, let me see if I can find this. We did a really neat program starting 2 years ago around the film Hidden Figures. It had been out in the theaters already, and it'd been out for a while, but we started getting requests from embassies all around the world, and then more and more and more and more. And so, again, how do we design how do we respond to the field? So we worked with Fox, and we sent this out to 120 countries, and multiple screenings. And it's a wonderful story of, obviously, of women's empowerment, about STEM. It's inspirational. It's about role models. And we created an exchange program where it's called Hidden No More. We began it that first year in 2017. It's going into its third year, bringing 50 women STEM leaders from 50 countries to the United States.
It's fantastic.
And these women are amazing. One was just honored in the United Kingdom with an OBE, and she's an extraordinary scientist. I don't even understand what she does. I think it's something in physics. I can't even understand what she does. But she was so inspired by this program and by the importance of writing and recording women in sciences. She has created to date 700 Wikipedia entries for women in science around the world.
I just want to point out that the woman who wrote the book that Hidden Figures is based on, her father-in-law's art show is in the Blum.
Oh, neat.
Right now.
This is Margot's father-in-law? Oh, neat.
All roads lead to Bar Harbor. It's always like that.
That's fantastic. Well, Margot actually came and we did a whole interview with her and how she found this story and how she wrote the book. And we did a big Facebook Live with all of our embassies and the creation of that. So, yeah.
Well, it's just all the more important you're doing this at a time of, we all know, embassies themselves, the buildings have been changed. They're much more difficult to get into because of security measures, and in many cases we abandon beautiful embassies in downtown parts of cities because they're not considered safe anymore. So this people-to-people work that you're doing is all the more important.
Yeah, and to that end, we have what are called American spaces all around the world, about 600. From in universities, it can be a bookshelf, we can call it American space, or they're wonderfully modern and big. We have one in Jakarta that's really impressive. It's in a mall, high tech, and I don't know the number of the footpath that goes through, but a lot of kids go through there, and it's wonderful. It's our convening space where we're doing a lot of our programs. We have big English language programs. It's when we have the speakers come through. So we've had to build those up over the years.
I see you have Apollo 11 on the screen. And
Yes.
How did you handle the 50th anniversary of the moon? Because it's such an amazing moment in world history, but also a pretty exciting thing if you're American. And so did you use that as a moment to teach and to celebrate our history?
Yes, and I think that it was quite exciting. We were able to, we're doing a lot of things in space, I think Hidden Figures and now Apollo 11, but we sent this out as well. And our embassies were really excited to be screening this, and Universal has been a great partner of ours on this. And this is a wonderful documentary. It's fantastic. It's so exciting. And so our embassies were able to screen this, and many of our embassies have NASA residents and colleagues in residence, and also have are doing a lot of engagement with different space agencies around the world. So this has been a wonderful celebration and conversation around the world as well with Apollo 11.
Are there any topics you shy away from? They're just too controversial?
Beyond what I was alluding to earlier of just the pure imagery not sexuality, but of showing that, I think there are. Interestingly, immigration, but that's not just now. It was then as well. In the last 7 years, I found that's because you can explore immigration and the role of immigration through obviously the diversity of the United States. and the people that are here and in incredible roles and doing all that. But the topic of immigration is difficult.
Do you have congressional oversight? I mean, that's a headache for anyone in Washington, but
Yes, but we have great congressional support. Many of our programs, great bipartisan support. I wouldn't say oversight per se, but if there's a question, we are sure to know.
we hear every year or two that NEA might be defunded or NEH, and that they're separate agencies and they have their own histories, but you seem spared that kind of living from year to year, that tension. Is that true?
I think there is that tension. I think that there's always going to be debate about how taxpayer money is spent, and that has certainly been to the fore, but in recent years. But I think that again, going back to the bipartisan support,
that's great.
It's been very strong. You know, the arts and culture sector represents a huge part of our GDP. I was just reading recently that it's over 4%, $800 billion, and that's across the United States. And so it's in everyone's interest, I think, to be able to support arts and culture, and it's an important part of our economy, and to be able to share that. That's a big part of our programming as well, is creative economy. We get lots of requests. I believe that an artist has to be many things, including an entrepreneur, and so many of our programs are focused on artists as entrepreneur, or how do you build out the creative economy.
When you're talking to foreign audiences, do you talk about financing of films and Kickstarter and ways to, because it costs a lot of money to make a movie. It's not like a painting, you can just make a painting, but is money a part of what you talk about with young people?
Almost every program, yes. There will be a question about how do I raise the money, where can I apply it, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that is a huge focus. But being able to share platforms like Kickstarter, and it's important. And getting people to think about different ways to fundraise, and that's an area certainly in, what is a creative producer? And not just applying for grants, but looking around for resources. But it's a challenge for instance, this is a program that I was alluding to earlier, Global Media Makers. This is the first year we had artists. This is an artist from Jordan who was making, we had directing workshops. This is Jeremy Padezwa, who's a director on Game of Thrones, actually. He did several of the episodes of Game of Thrones, and this was a TV episode. And Zaid, who is sitting down right there now, went back to Jordan, and he is now the head writer for the new Sesame Street series.
Really?
For Syrian refugees in the Levant. But so back to your question about the fundraising, I think what's important is being able, and what these exchanges do, is connect the filmmakers and the artists and the participants themselves, so they have a network, they have a community, so when they go back, there are other people that they can reach out to. Being a filmmaker, being an artist is a solitary business, and to be able to have others in your community that are facing similar challenges is important.
So you're so good at helping foreign populations understand us and helping us understand them. Can you help us Americans understand each other better? Because we need a little help.
It was interesting. I know we were talking about it a little bit this last evening, but a filmmaker 2 years ago, when we just had we have an orientation for American Film Showcase. So we bring in the documentary filmmakers or the writers or we're doing a lot in VR and gaming and composing, and so we're bringing everyone together. And I remember one filmmaker turned to me and said, "You need to create this for the United States. We need to do all of this here." And having had this experience and seeing personally the power of an exchange program and seeing the impact that it's had on thousands of different people and bringing people together, personally, yes, I think it would be an incredibly powerful thing to think about, how we can create programs, or how do we bring us together from different parts? We're in our, so much of the challenges that we face, not only in exchanges in sort of the State Department, how is technology, how have media silos, isolated people, how do we bring them together? So I think there's some interesting things that could be applied.
We did, full disclosure, we talked about this a little bit last night over dinner, and we couldn't help noticing the Champlain Institute model is a pretty good model for bringing different kinds of people together.
Absolutely.
And people from different political backgrounds still need to eat, and they like to laugh, and they like to meet different kinds of people. I think there is still that curiosity. There was an older way Americans used to socialize before, basically, I think before the internet. The internet is wonderful, but it has also put us into silos of our own creation, or not always our own creation. And so, do you find in your global traveling that there are social situations like meals that work especially good for conversations?
Yes. I mean, and I think that's what, in addition to all of the wonderful universality of music or dance or films, we all have to eat. And the dinner table brings us together. And I think that we all can share in that, and we can learn. I mean, and we'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow with Sam Sifton, and which I think is so interesting, is what is the story of food, and how does it bring us together, and what is the community, and what is that act of sitting together?
So could you help us design a program that would take Champlain Institute and send it to every city on Earth?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm committed to that, yes.
Now, we'll get to questions in just a minute. You briefly mentioned gaming. That's an interesting technology.
Yes.
Young people love it. Older people less so. But where's all this going? Are you doing virtual reality work? Are you using drone cameras to film? I mean, so what are the trends coming that you see before the rest of us?
A funny story about drone cameras. We had a cappella group who went to Kazakhstan and wanted to film an aerial shot of an outdoor a cappella concert, and they brought their own drone. Yeah, that didn't go down so well. Hadn't cleared airspace for that. But yes, we are trying to, I think the most important thing is that there are tried and true exchange programs, and that the formula works, and there's no need to change. But obviously, especially in the storytelling and in the technologies, is trying to innovate and keep up with that, and figuring out what the application is. We introduced VR in a program in Global Media Makers here, and actually working with Google and different other groups who are active in this space. And in fact, some of the fellows that were on that first program have taken back VR and sort of what they've learned from that immersive augmented reality experience, and what does that experience engender. They've taken it back to Turkey, and he's actually now teaching in universities in Turkey, and he's been doing a lot of workshops in Kurdistan as well.
That's great.
We actually worked with South by Southwest, the festival in Austin. We brought in 5 VR storytellers this last March, which was really exciting. And gaming, I'm trying to figure that out. Learning from my 13-year-old. But it's huge. It's huge. And actually, gaming is much larger industry than I think our film industry. But it's also learning how people are engaging with this, and sort of these, they're immersive, they're character driven. And how do we create in a positive way? We all are reading about the dangers sometimes of some of these the games, but what is the positive thing that we can do? So yeah, I think we're learning. We're in our sports division. Esports is huge.
What's that?
I think it is. I heard that it's basically watching people play games I think that they're going to do something in
I
a
know
stadium watching people
I
play
know a
games.
teenager who spends a huge amount of time watching videos of other kids playing video games.
I think that would, yes,
Right. And
yes.
apparently it's very popular.
Yes.
So
One of the one of the things I'm doing in Los Angeles is going to be talking to gaming companies, and so I'll be better educated and try to figure out what the next program may be. So
maybe a future category for Champlain Institute could be just translating what teenagers care about for older generations. We'll secretly spy on them and report back to each other.
for my daughter, it would be YouTube makeup videos. So I don't know how
Right,
interesting that is. So.
Well, I could talk to Catherine forever, but I have a feeling there are other questions out there. So how are we working the microphones today, Lynn? Is it just raise your hand?
And then you repeat back the
Okay, so if anyone wants to ask Catherine Collins a question, I can repeat it. Yes, ma'am?
You talk about telling the story of America through many viewpoints, essentially. But there's kind of a pressure going on. I come out of history. So I've been following all the notions of what sort of history do we represent in our museums, in our public statues, and what have you. And there certainly is a pressure on many sides of the political structure to look at history essentially as celebratory, looking at the things that we want to valorize and make public, especially in the public sphere, such as kind of the work you're doing. And I'm wondering whether these impulses are pressuring you on the way you tell your story at the or America's story through your work. And I think of that particularly as I'm here at College of the Atlantic, because we are often at College of the Atlantic looking at innovative ways that people in small ways and community ways and on different ways telling their story, which might have something to do with solutions to agriculture, solutions to dealing with the sea or what have you. And you might find some pressure coming down on you from other sectors of
Right.
population, especially the political sector.
So just a very good question. There are a lot of different ways of telling history, and in a job like Catherine's, there are pressures to be celebratory of America's history. How do you deal with that pressure and tell a sophisticated story that can include criticism? Is that essentially what you're saying?
Right, the different impulses as do we represent America as it is, or the high points that somebody.
Do we just do the high points of our history, or do we represent ourselves in our full complexity?
In our full complexity. Sure, there may be pressures, but I think that right now we're certainly, if I were to capture the kinds of stories that we're sending overseas in documentary, they're individuals and communities dealing with hard problems, with the opioid crisis, with gang violence, and women in discrimination. I think that makes for more discussion, but it also shows how different people are dealing with problems. And I think that is the aspect of being able to relate and see how people are dealing with it, and that while yes, Apollo 11 is an extraordinary celebration of amazing accomplishment, at the same time, we are sending over documentaries about human trafficking here in the United States. We're sending over stories of police officers dealing with mental health on the front line. We have one called Hillbilly that we'll be sending over this coming year, which is made by a filmmaker from Appalachia in Kentucky. Her family divided by the recent election. And I found it a very fair and balanced documentary exploring what's going on. But there's always going to be that tension of no matter what time, I believe, and there are people who've been longer in this than I have here today. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. But I think it's I think Edward Murrow he was head of USA at one point, and had used the expression, you know, we're going to tell our story, warts and all. And yes, there is that pressure. And I believe that the conversations, people respect when there is we're telling important stories, and I think that the kinds and the caliber of the filmmakers that we're sending overseas would expect no less.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir? A lot of hands, great to see.
Just prior to the U.S. bicentennial, USIA had a competition, and they invited independent filmmakers to submit their works. We had a young woman from far northern Maine, from the St. John Valley, who produced a film called, I think it was My Canadian-American Family. And it was an award winner in this competition. USIA showed it in all over the world. But when the bicentennial came, she was not allowed to show it in the United States because of restrictions in the National Security Act of 1947.
The Smith Month.
Right. And I guess the question I have is, I want to draw you out a little bit on the subject of propaganda. There were obviously members of the Congress in 1947 who felt that USIA was a propaganda agency, and recalling France and Italy in the 30s, they did not want USIA's product to be shown in the United States. How do you screen yourself? How do you prevent yourself from becoming a propaganda agency?
So the question is, how do we avoid propaganda in what is a nationally supported program to enhance the image of the United States overseas? How do you avoid the temptation or the accusation of propaganda?
Sure. I think that programs have taken a change over time. USIA, at that time when George Stevens, I think, was head of it, and they were commissioning over 300 documentaries at that, and it's gone from sort of the commissioning now to the selection of already made, produced, independent documentaries and workshops. I think that I feel very comfortable in where I am right now, in that we are not, and our programs are not, and they are purely exchange of individuals and allowing people to speak for themselves. We are not paying for films to be made, nor are the films that we've selected, we're not editing them. When overseas and artists coming here, we encourage very lively discussions. But it is something to be mindful of, to be respectful of the artists and their comfort levels, so that they don't feel compromised as well. But it is something that I do think about, but I feel very comfortable in not being a propaganda in the extraordinary diversity of perspectives that we're sending overseas.
Linda?
First of all, Catherine, thank you. You do great work. Secondly, you were very diplomatic when asked about how things change from administration to administration, that your mission remains the same writ large. But just quickly, what is your budget, so we have a sense of scale, and has that fluctuated over the years you've been involved?
The question is, what is her budget? Good Washington hardball question. And has it fluctuated over the years?
So cultural programs writ large has remained steady, again, in the time that I've been there, about $10 million. My programs, the film programs, have increased sizably and continue to grow. And now I'm operating in about 4 million. And that's from ECA. Our embassies have very robust programs also in this space and have their own budgets as well. But I would say that, again, encouraged to see that it has remained steady and strong. I think people really recognize the power of these programs, certainly in Congress, certainly in the field, and actually some of the biggest supporters of our programs, and certainly in talking about members in the military, they do. They see the power of diplomacy, public diplomacy, in conversations that I've had, and so I think let's hope the strong support remains. Thank you.
I see Will Gardner. Yep.
Hi. As you are sort of telling the American story overseas, I imagine there are other countries also telling their stories at different sort of levels of volume. And I think I've read recently the Chinese, for example, are ramping up their efforts to tell their story. How do you think about that? Is that a competitive thing? Is it a battle for hearts and minds? Is it completely independent? And also, if we're spending 10 million, you know how much they're spending?
So the question is, China is also ramping up its efforts to tell its own story. How do we acknowledge that? How do we compete with them? What is the plan going forward?
I'll say my perspective and what I've observed. There are more people who are following this and will know more. But yes, certainly it is, I would say, if you look in China, it's not a balanced situation in the sense of here, I think the Confucius Center is opening up quite rapidly. It's about access also to educational institutions and numbers of films that can be sent overseas, and it's television stations, and certainly if you look at Russia, the broadcast RT and such like that. I would say in this space of media and programming that their budgets would likely be much larger.
And there was a question right next to Will. Yep, back there.
Yeah, I think the first two questions were really interesting and touching something interesting. You talked about representing America in its entirety, and but at the end of the day, your department's brief is to promote American culture abroad, specifically promote American culture to boost their soft power. You talked about earlier about maybe sort of wincing when you see films and stuff that maybe demonstrate American sexuality or over sexuality. So evidently, there must be a bit of self-censorship, or there must be a bit of censorship within the department, because the whole idea is to promote U.S. culture, and to have people want to be assimilated with that. So I was wondering if you could maybe comment on that a bit more. And then also at the end of the day, it's a results-driven thing. So how do you measure if people's opinions are changing about the U.S.? How do you measure if the money you're spending, the taxpayer money you're spending, is actually working, and people want to assimilate more to Western cultures, Western ideas, which is ultimately what you're maybe trying to do.
Yeah.
So two parts to the question. How does the department, how does ECA do censorship to make sure the films and programs are acceptable? And then how do you measure the impact that they are having?
Well, I think censorship, sensitive to what you're asking and sensitive to what you were asking as well, I think censorship is a hard word. I think that there are certain topics that and certain films that would not be productive, certainly overseas. I think I mentioned earlier immigration. I think that I think that we do send films overseas that have individuals or certain characters or position points that might be critical. It's hard to find, we're always mindful of fair and balanced of different political viewpoints. We can't be seen to be on one side or the other in the political sphere. As far as impact, it's a very good question. Measuring public diplomacy, and for all of our programs, it's hard because it's what are you measuring? How are you measuring? Is it right after a screening? Is it measuring it the next week? Is it measuring it in 6 years? I think one of the greatest demonstration of impact is by our alumni and seeing what they're doing and the leadership roles that they take on. And that's on the sort of the longer term level. But yes, so we work with, for instance, with our film programs, we work with the USC Annenberg School and their media impact group. And so right now, very active in that space and measuring, how our perceptions changed. A lot of it can be immediately done after a screening. There are great stereotypes that are out there about Americans. We sent a film overseas called American Nurse several years ago. It was in Russia. And audience members were shocked that it was a story about American nurses caring for the elderly, caring for the vets, it was a very small, very intimate film about what nurses did. And there were several audience members in Moscow who were shocked that Americans would, that there would be that kind of caring for their elderly or for their vets. And so there was a big discussion about that. But so would that be an immediate impact? Yes. But it's something that we're working on, is evaluation. And it's really important to capture.
Sir? I'll get you next.
Somewhat related is, how do you deal with racism, and how intentional is your programming around racism in the United States?
How do you deal with racism? How intentional is your programming around racism?
Yeah. With great sensitivity, and I think that obviously it's a topic on everyone's mind. I think is to discuss it head on. I think that we're lucky to work with filmmakers who are exploring this, with musicians, with different artists, with writers who are directly exploring this in their art and their experiences. And I think that is the best way, is to let the artists speak for themselves of how they're doing it, but not to shy away from it and to discuss it, because obviously it's something that is happening around the world and provides an important conversation point through the entry point of the artists themselves.
Yep, in the very back.
This is kind of a vague question, but could you extrapolate a little more on kind of the partnership with Hollywood? I know that that's probably an important thing. You're kind of saying a lot of the films kind of incubate there, and then you're not as much about kind of cultivating films nowadays as finding films that represent and then bringing them out. I think that's kind of what you said. A little bit more than actually giving grants for the films. I guess that's my question.
So the details of the partnership with Hollywood.
Sure, and we work. Obviously, we're working across the entertainment space in Los Angeles, but also New York, Atlanta, different parts of the country that are in this entertainment and media space. But with Hollywood per se, I think partnership it ranges from being able to work directly with the studios and exhibition of film to it's also mentoring. I think that is where people get the most excited by. We're doing a program right now on television show running with an extraordinary group of writers from Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. They're in Los Angeles now, and they're workshopping television shows, sort of the heyday of television. They're workshopping right now in writing workshops, and we're working with some of the top showrunners in Los Angeles. And again, it's that connection. I think it's really wonderful that we'll be able to work with some of the leading people in Hollywood in the television space. And I should say also companies like Netflix and Amazon and Apple are interested in these kind of programs. And this is what is exciting writ large with partnership, is that as these platforms are international and everyone's looking for content and everyone is looking for local content now, is that there's this exciting synergy of connecting a lot of the talent that's coming out of our programs or that have been in our programs, and they're talented in themselves, but to be able to connect them with the Netflixes and the Amazons, and to be able to create those relationships.
Darren, one more. Okay, final question. Yep, sir. Oh, yeah.
In so many parts of the world, American culture and media is ubiquitous to the point where many countries are finding it overwhelming. So I wonder, in your programming, are you trying to counterbalance American presence that you couldn't avoid if you wanted to in countries, or are you trying to offset some of the messages or complement it in somehow? How do you approach what you provide compared to what's available free throughout the world?
Sure, and that's a really good.
Could you all hear that? So Tim is asking, how do you counterbalance the overwhelming American media presence in the world?
With popular music and film. So I think that goes back to a lot of the artists that we're working with are creating films that potentially haven't traveled overseas. Some countries will only get the big blockbusters, and they tend to, they're all sort of Marvel Comics now, and so, but other big blockbusters, a lot of people, the stereotypes that come through the Hollywood films, a lot of people think everybody in the United States is wealthy, everybody has expensive cars, everybody goes to college, there are these assumptions that are perpetuated through some of these films, and so I think the importance is to bring all of the different artists to be able to create a more nuanced portrait.
Well, on that note, please join me in thanking Catherine Brown Collins for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Apologies for the nail guns. We moved it over here to avoid the construction going on the north lawn, but we've got to put a new roof on Seafox. So don't forget to go out and watch movies. I see Lisa Vicente here, who is the co-founder of Real Pizza. She's a COA alumna, so go watch movies downtown at Real Pizza. Yeah. Don't forget, we're only going to take a short break. We'll be back in 20 minutes. Go online. All of these talks are available online, and there's a survey up online. So we're interested in what you think of this space versus the other space, and how we're doing. So don't forget to tell us about that. And then we'll continue with the kind of virtual reality storyteller, because Bryn Musser, who is up in just 20 minutes, does a lot of that. So thank you both again, and we'll see everyone in 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you.